The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
It's another beautiful spring morning here in New Zealand. I'm feeling pretty good today. I had surgery on the weekend, last weekend, and it took a while for the drugs to sort of clear my system. But now I'm feeling pretty good, and I just feel so happy to be sitting here and looking at these scores with you guys. And, you know, it's just a kind of almost an overwhelming feeling to be looking at the last of 89 scores, the last 5 out of 89 scores that I received from the website subscribers. In total, there were 171 scores submitted. And actually, I think that there was a 90th score or a 90th entrant in this process here for the website subscribers, but they ended up not, they pulled out at the last minute. So I would have had an even 90 here. But, altogether, it was 171 scores that I received, and I just think it's monumental. I don't know if that's ever happened before in the history of the internet or in the history of orchestration coaching. But I'm happy to do it, and I'm so relieved that my health got back together, at least for the, I can't, I'm not superstitious, so I'm not going to knock on wood, but, that's sort of the feeling that you get when your health is sort of been unpredictable. So I can't predict if it's going to hold out, but I sure hope that it will. And I was just thinking to myself the other day, wouldn't it be wonderful if I was able to eventually get these orchestration challenges underway again, if I could trust my health enough for that. So, so cross your fingers for me, everybody. And now let's look at Link's really, really great score. All right, so just a few little things here. There's a slight like you're putting two different types of markings together here. And it ends up sort of not being either, right? So like here you have the letter I and then a 0 or the letter O, right? And just it kind of ends up looking like the word Io or Eo, if you want to be Greek goddess about it, or Greek myth about it, sorry. And like if you're going to use the Roman numeral system, then the Roman numeral system should be applied to your to the names, right? So it should be flutes I and II, right? And then I tells us that it's the first one, and you do not need an O after it. Just put a period. Now there is the there is like the convention of having an O after the after an Arabic numeral, okay? And that if you insist on entering that, if that is your style, right? And in this particular thing, you should be using Arabic numerals, right? So if you had the Arabic numeral 1 and you want a little O after it, what you need to do is press down on your Alt or Option key, depending on whether you're using like PC or Mac. And then as you're holding down the Alt key, type the number 0, right? And then you'll get a little, what's it, like a superscript O or 0 right after the 1, right? And that would be the proper way to, that sort of primo, secundo, right? Kind of writing or marking. All right. So let's get back to this. There are a few little contradictions here in the way that you marked your tempos. All right. So first one is you're saying eighth note equals 72. So that would be assuming that the conductor would be beating eighth notes, right? And it would almost be assuming that this would be 4/8, right? Because like that would be telling everybody where is the beat, what are the different beats that the conductor is going to be doing, and there's no need for that. Half of 72 is 36. 36 beat is perfectly easy to follow for symphonic musicians, even intermediate grade, right? Semi-pro and university players and so on, right? Good high school players should be able to follow a 36, right? And then here you say allegro monotropo, half note equals 63. Okay, so this should be quarter note equals 126, right? Because you don't have cut time indicated here. Don't go half note equals anything unless it's cut time, right? And there's no need for this to be cut time. This is a 4/4, right? Da da 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 and a 1 and a 2, right? So it's definitely in 4/4 time. It's not in cut time. It's not da da 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, right? It's not that. That's not the beat, right? So just always use the appropriate the metronome marking. All right. So, So those are just a few little points I wanted to go over first. All right. Now let's talk about the orchestration. So you chose to go with just like a standard modern orchestra. Like these aren't, maybe there are some parts that you kind of score in the classical style, right? Some bits and pieces, sort of trying to kind of stay within Beethoven's kind of voice, like for instance, octave Fs, right, in the horns. But generally speaking, you really are scoring for a modern ensemble. And in fact, like we'd never really get around to the heavy brass, do we? Right? It's like you could have just left them out and had a larger staff size. But maybe you went on and you orchestrated more of this for your own, enjoyment, or left that option open for later times, depending on how well you did on this, right? And I really apologize if you've been waiting on me to evaluate this to help you out there. All right, so let's break down this this little introduction here, just like in terms of how smooth do you have the strings scored here? And I think that's actually a pretty nice bowing pattern, right? This is I believe this is what I did. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Now here, like if you put in like if this were moved back to here, like you had a half bar, right? So the incomplete bar comes to an end for the 2/4, and then the 4/4 starts in the middle right here, which is actually it's not one bar of 2/4 with a double bar in the middle. It is an incomplete bar, half of a 2/4 bar, and then it is a pickup bar or pickup beat or bar to the 4/4. So the 4/4 would go here, and then the the tempo mark could start right here. Did you notice how in the mock-up it goes da 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 da? Right. So obviously the tempo mark needs to go right here, right? So yeah. So just try to maintain that, like what I had in the template. Now, if the template didn't translate to what you had available, or you just decided to start from scratch, there's nothing I can do to help with that. But if this is, I think this might be MuseScore or Dorico or something like that. It looks like MuseScore to me. Then I really need to get savvy with MuseScore if I'm going to do this again, and have MuseScore, Dorico, and Sibelius templates. And as far as Finale is concerned, maybe a Finale user can put one of those together for me or something like that. So let's get back to the slurring. The slurring is pretty good, right? So this, down, up, down, up, right? Just on this fermata, and then so the bowing doesn't have to be uniform between all of the sections at all times, but this really does help right in here. And then the pizzicato and the double basses, I would say pianissimo sostenuto, right? So that will have the double basses do like a little bit. They'll add a little bit of vibrato to the pizzicato, and that will help to maintain the energy of the note. So it will, last as long as it can possibly last. It won't last for 2 full beats in, at 36 quarter notes per minute, but it will still, there'll still be a little teeny bit left over, right? But, notice that here are your octaves, right? And they're placed an octave higher than they are in the piano part. And here you have a unison on the pitch, right? You don't have your double basses way down. So you have definitely changed your F drone accompaniment around. Now here we've got clarinets doubling the second violins, and bassoon doubling the violas, and then oboe doubling the first violins. Now here I would be tempted to have you to say, oh well, your melody instrument should be doubling the should be playing the first note of the melody, except for the fact that the C is harder to control, right? So it's not that it couldn't be played at pianissimo by a great player and really blend in with everything else. But then you just really have to count on the the smoothness of the arc here may be interrupted by the first oboe entering right on that F. So the F may sound like it is the first note of melody, and everything else before it was just a chord, right? That is the risk right there. Now, if this were in G and everything were up like a whole step, then it would be no problem at all. I would say, oboe starting on a D, that's less risky, right? But I mean, it's to a great oboe player, they're probably just rolling their eyes right now and saying, I have no problem either way. This is a little strange here. You have your slur covering repeated notes and so on, which is sort of like a semi-portato. I would say just have everybody do the same thing, because with a unified bowing, like with this, you are, if unified bowing and unified slurring, right, then everything just merges together beautifully, and you don't have the oboe sticking out of the sound picture, right? Right now it's just, it's a beautiful chorale. But in a live situation, the oboe will tend to play out a little bit with the way that you got the slur across here, or at least it won't merge, won't blend absolutely indistinguishably. Right? And I really love the way that you have flute come in over the top here, first flute. Da da da. Yeah, yeah. So it's so my feeling is looking at what is coming up ahead, right? I feel that this does set the mood very effectively, and it's been very rare that I would say no to that. I think that pretty much almost every single orchestrator really did set the mood effectively. But I mean, to a certain degree, that is the nature of this intro, right? It's kind of hard to do it wrong, maybe. And there have been a couple where it was a little like it didn't quite match up and so on. But I feel that this was pretty good. All right, so that checks that criterion off the box. All right, so good work on that, Link. Yeah, and here, like, I would have you adjust the clarinets to, like, either have your. Well, see, the thing is, like, I think that just not being careful about slurring over repeated notes, right? Like there's a specific thing about that, right? When it's just done without any thought, the players will play it, but I feel that you need to really, if you have a slur like this and in some wind parts and like that in others, and then this in one and that, and do you see what I'm saying? It's like it's just better to have it be uniform if you want the timbre to really blend together beautifully. Okay, so now let's go ahead to the first melodic statement, the first thematic statement. All right. So this is a real interesting way of interpreting the material, and here you've got up, down, right? So what if you were to do this? What if you just shorten the slur so that we get an actual down bow on the down beat, right? You may have missed, Link, like that I've got some I think was it 10 or 12 12 common scoring errors, and one of them is just always slurring across from the pickup into the downbeat, and I feel that players and music of this period wants to have an articulation on the downbeat, right? So it might be better to go ta ta ta, right? So you get the division of the bow; they're equal length, and it's easier for the players, your string players, to nuance or add any kind of to follow the conductor if they've got any particular ideas about stress and those kinds of things. Here, like the other problem too is that you've got it's a subtle point, but you've got some higher pitches here, and then you've got some lower pitches that sort of dip down and back. So there's a danger here that this part of the melody won't be even, right? It'll be kind of almost digging in as the violinists go and play that lower part of their range. So the way to moderate all that is to end the first slur here, then have another slur that goes from here to there, and then take this slur and have it start there, right? And then you got a really beautiful even approach. Now, as to these repeated C's, you could put a slur across them and then mark them with tenuto articulations, and then you get this like throbbing effect called portato, right? So right, and that gives the feeling as if they are slurred together, but then you still get the identity of each of these notes as separate notes, right? So it's like a cross between slurring and not slurring, right? And seeing as how you've got here you've got the same pitches staccato and slurred, it's a very similar effect as to what's going on here with the combined sound of the staccatos and the slurs, is to have these C's be portato, right? So anyways, that would be my recommendation there. And then what I would say is, were those things to be fixed in that way, I would say your melody starts with elegance and there's a natural flow to your accompaniment, right? Which is carried on here. And then, once again, here you've got this, you slur across the pickup, right, again, right? Why not just have this be the down bow and this be the up bow? That's the most, a dotted rhythm going down bow then up bow is like the most common thing in the world, right? And then you can divide your bar the same exact way that you did before, right? You could have, see, it's like what's really important is for this not to be a down bow into a long gradual crescendo, right? Because it should be up bow in a long gradual crescendo. That's just where the energy of the bow wants to be. And then as things sag downwards, it's better to have a nice long down bow, right? So maybe if you just went, just had this, just left this alone the way it is, and then take away the slur from here, and then slur forward, between the first and second note, and then move the end point of this slur forward so that you have a slur there, right? So it'd be down, up, especially pushing into the to the middle of the crescendo, and then down, nice long 3-beat down bow, right? And then down here you could also have this slurred as well, right? And this could be if you put a slur over these staccatos, then you end up with mezzo staccato. So it's almost like portato, but it's just it's a much lighter staccato, right? So it's not too bouncy, right? But if you want the real bouncy kind of an effect, then that's fine. But if you want it to be a little bit more moderated, that's one way of going about it. So with some of those changes, and then of course this is all fine. First clarinet and first bassoon. Then I would say natural transition to octave, check. Right. It's a really lovely color of the lower winds doubling the strings, the violins, I should say. Right. Just has a wonderful direct and lovely period sound to it. Now here, just a comment here on your abbreviations. You don't need to say fulls, obs, cluls, and bsns. All you have to do is just have FL period, OB period, CL period. You don't even need the B flat on there, right? Unless you had other, like if you were to change over to A clarinets at some point in this piece, then I would say, yeah, B flat here, A there. But if there is never going to be any other kind of clarinet, just CL period. Then BSN period, right? And then here, horns 1 and 2, 3 and 4, there's going to be an assumption that that's the layout. That's the default. So all you have to do is just say 4 horns in F, or horns 1 through 4 in F, right? And then here you just have like a little HN period floating between these two things. And then here, same thing, TPT period, TBN period, BTBN period. Right. And then this is all fine, the way that it's scored. And I personally prefer DB for double bass rather than CB. I've just seen too many, I've just seen too much confusion between contrabass and contrabassoon in rehearsal, in parts, in places where the score gets condensed down, and you're really not sure like whether or not the only thing that is telling you whether or not it's a contrabass versus a contrabassoon part is the fact whether it's higher or lower than the other instruments, right? So I just really prefer DB. It's just really, there's nothing else besides a double bass that this could possibly be. So with those changes, I would say first section, all those boxes are ticked. Now let's talk about the this next part in here. I thought this was really lovely. You've got you're so sparsely. There's such sparse use of winds here. You didn't even need to have 2 on a part, right? You could have just said, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, right? And like, because you're only using one of each anyway, right? Da da da. So da 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 da. Yeah, and it's just very very cool to have flute on top, and then the violin. So just being aware that in a standard situation, the flute will get absorbed by all 30. You have in a full orchestra you have 16 firsts and 14 seconds, right? So that's 30 violinists. They're all playing the same part, and their resonance, even at pianissimo for both parts, their resonance is going to absorb the higher sound of the flute, right? So if you wanted to bring this flute out and really make sure that it wasn't buried, then just take off one of these P's and make it piano over pianissimo. And then you get a beautiful live, a much liver sound here. And so does this, does the entrance of this contrast with the theme before? Yes, it does, because you don't really it's the first appearance since here of the flute doing something, right? So here the main theme is stated here in the strings, and then here we've got this. This will blend really nicely. It won't really stand out on its own unless the players play out. And then here we have the flute return again. I think that's really lovely. So but there'll be a tendency for it to get absorbed. And then you've got just little bits and pieces of harmonic support, right? And this little line in here, that's something that I hadn't seen done, and it doesn't hurt at all. Yeah, there's a little bit of bassoon in there as well. Da 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 da. Yeah, and just really nice doubling here on the violas with the cellos. I think that works really great. But one thing is that Beethoven did put in Leggermente, right? And he was telling the pianist, look, I want you to play this very dexterously, right? I want you to convey a sense of agility and delicacy, right? So there is zero reason why you should leave that out for any player who's going to be playing 16ths during this little mini passage, right? So I would say put it back in. There's no need for it to be missing. Now, going on to this next part, emphatic color of line, I ask myself in the criteria, da, 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 and so on. And I really love the way that you divide up the bowing here. Ta, 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 ta. Yeah, I think that works really great. And then, you are being so delicate with everything. Like pianissimo, pianissimo, piano, and so on. And you're just pushing forward to a piano, right? So I would say that by soft pedaling everything, you may be taking away some of the dramatic impact that you might possibly be able to bring into this, right? Maybe the opening could be piano, and then continue piano, and then this part could be piano, and then you could push forward to a mezzo forte, and then go to piano subito. I think it would bring a lot of color into it. Now, as to the orchestration itself, I really love the idea of the clarinet doubling the violins. I think that works great. I like the articulation on the downbeat. I think that helps to drive home this, and you should also do that with these. There's no need for your bassoon to go ba ta ta ta. Right, it's much much better. Just like the other strings, right? Just make a match. And then ta ta ta. Yeah, so nice setup here, especially with your horns. Harmonic density is good. Setting up the little chorale to follow, right? And you have this little soft tutti in here. Now I would say make the slurring match for all instruments. So here you want ta ta. So if you really want this third beat, this middle of the bar, to have emphasis, then you need to have your other parts do that as well, right? So just have them going ta ta, right? And then that blends that putting in the soft tenuto on the third beat for all the instruments means that it carries forward in the scheme that you've got here. Ta 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 ta. right? And I just think that the regularity there is, it just is, it's less nebulous. The way that it is now, that we don't really get, like, the way that you've got it scored here in the winds, it makes this tenuto mark here on the third beat inconsequential. So if you're in love with this smoothness right in here, then it should be given to the strings and you should take away the tenuto. But if you love the idea of emphasizing the third beat, then vice versa, right? But yeah, nice little horn scoring in here. I like the way you keep it simple. It's very effective, right? Yeah, I just love the colors. I love the subtleties. I love the vibe. Do you know what I mean, Lindsay? It's like it has a it just has this really lovely, spacious kind of reverence is the wrong idea. More like a reverie, right? Do you know what I mean? It's just there's something very meditative about it and inward looking in a beautiful way. So I really like this a lot, and it's a great way to start this compilation of website subscriber entries. So look, I better not go on and on about every single entry, or we'll be here for like 3 hours. But I just wanted to say, really, really great work, and I really enjoyed looking at it, and I'm so glad I'm able to finally get to this and to put it to bed, so to speak, and give people the advice that they should have had 2 years ago when I started getting sick. So thank you so much, and I just really appreciate it, and just excellent work. So now let's take a look at the next selection in this compilation. Very clever and individual, Alexandre. I I love all of the little cinematic touches. And, there are a lot of different things that you experiment with here. And I always feel like this is a little potpourri of different orchestration ideas, right? And, the, the annoying thing about it is that I could easily unpack every single one of these 4 phrases and spend like half an hour on each one. So I'm going to try to not do that. We will just focus on the effectiveness of the scoring. All right. So I feel you could have gone a little slower here, but I do like the rallentando here and the going towards the end of the phrase. Yeah, Adagio 47. I mean, that's that's a little faster than the 42 that I think 42 or 40 that was in the template. So yeah, all right. So just a few little words of advice. You are very random about the way that you assign slurs to different parts, right? Like we see a slur here in the horns, and we see none in the violins or clarinets. And then we see another one here in violin and horns, and none in the clarinets and other horns, right? There are just a few little things here. Like 2 horns in F1, 2 horns in F2, right? Shouldn't it be 4 horns in F just floating in the middle here? Maybe you don't know how to do that yet with the application you have, but you're better to have 4 horns in F, right? And when you give a number 1 and 2 like this, then it gives the score reader the idea that there are only 2 horn parts, like this is the first and that's the second, right? So just really, really be careful about how you assign numbers to horn parts. If this is Dorico, you shouldn't you should you should have it set up in your in your application that you can't do this without a little warning box coming up and saying, "Listen, that you're giving people the wrong idea." But I suspect that this might be. I mean, it looks really beautiful and clean, but that doesn't mean anything because MuseScore is getting really beautiful and clean looking. This should be a double bar, just like in the score, in the piano score, correct? All right. So those are just a few little things. Yeah. All right. I feel like, let's just really look at what you're doing here, right? You are starting with strings, clarinet doubling the the first violin line, and then we got a little bit of horn here. These brass are all in C, right? Yeah, and then sort of giving over to the trumpets and the trombones as things progress. Okay, and you're trying to sort of tame everything. You are definitely manicuring things with with your with your dynamic markings here. So yeah, maybe you were doing that just as a way of kind of balancing things with the playback, but in a live situation, you can't give everybody different dynamics all over the place. It's better to have a foreground and a background texture, and those textures be assigned to different instruments, or those dynamics be assigned to different instruments where it's very obvious what their role is, right? So if there is a role that is a supporting role, right, or a role where there's an instrument that is notorious for being loud, then step them back a degree dynamically. And then when there are instruments that are obviously intended to be leading, right, then they should be like the louder dynamic, right, or the stronger dynamic. Loud is not really a thing. It's strength or restraint, right? Okay. So, having said all that, I felt that there's something that you notice about this intro here, and that is that it really, there's hardly, there's no double bass. The cellos just have the role that you might assign to a double bass, whereas the cellos could have been providing more support, right? And then same thing with the second violins. No second violins at all, right? So they don't take any of these harmonic roles we see in other instruments. So you might need a bit of a rethink here, right? Also, this can be a full quarter note, correct? Because that's if you listen to the piano audio that I provided, as played by Spencer Myer, he actually leaves his thumb sitting on that sounding F sharp in the piano interpretation, which comes out as the pitch of G here, right? So yeah, there's just some things to fix. I would say rounding out the strings is what I would do, and I would have everybody in the string section play piano, right? And I would have them carry through here, right? Continue holding the harmony all the way through, and just fill in the second violin part, give this pizzicato to the double basses, and see if the cellos can support the violas or some other kind of a thing, right? Maybe they can come in and double what's going on here in the trombones. Then, if you want your clarinet part, and which clarinet? Is this the first clarinet, second clarinet? I can't tell. Is it both clarinets? You should write in a due if you intend both clarinets. You should write in number 1 if you just intend the first clarinet player, right? Okay. So that's another thing. Is just like you didn't mark the entrances. I think that I really am going to have a list of guidelines, and people are going to have to check off on their entry form. Did I read the guidelines and proofread my work? Yes, no, right? Or just I have read the guidelines and proofread my work as a radio, like what do they call a radio box or whatever. And if you don't check it, you can't your form and your score won't submit, right? All right. So that would be one of them that I would put on there. You got to tell us which horn player this is. Is this the first horn? I would assume. All right. So, so here, the way that you've got it scored, the horn is actually going to be the strongest thing here because it is, twice as strong as the first violins, and it's marked at the same dynamic level. Now, of course, the player can compensate for that, but then you have pianissimo clarinet. So, it sounds to me like you sort of want the clarinet to kind of blend in behind the horns and everything else, and yeah, but then, like, the clarinet ends up taking a greater role in the music, and the first horn just ends up dying off as the trumpet comes in. Now, did you notice how sort of weird and kind of eerie and not all that smooth and pleasant the timbre was when we got to the end of the melodic line here? Your mock-up in this case is not lying to you. So combining clarinet and trumpet, I'm assuming this is just intended to be first trumpet. So combining those two, and then having them blend with the first violins is not going to be the nicest color. Like, just in fact, a lot of people, like they'll only blend clarinets and trumpets just to give the trumpets a little bit more tone weight, right? And the clarinetists hate that, right? Because they don't like their overtones are really different from a trumpet, and so it's they can be dead on at the root pitch, and it can still feel out of tune above, right? So, So anyway, it might not be the most beautiful combination. It might be much better to have this on English horn, to be completely frank with you, because it's a really beautiful combination with trumpets, and there's no reason why your trumpet here couldn't play the first note, right? So that's my feelings about this, right? It still needs a little bit of work. Does it set the mood effectively? It's very cinematic, right? And what follows is cinematic. So for that regard, I would say that it does set the mood. In terms of mood setting, it is effective, but in terms of scoring, I think you just need a little bit more work on this, okay? But it's not bad. It's just like there are things that like the score reader considers to be punctuation. Like punctuation in a sentence, commas and capital letters and periods and semicolons and so on, right? And in a musical sentence, we look at those as articulation marks, slurs, dynamics, telling us which person is starting at what part, right? So you have a lot of incomplete grammar here and usage. So just really try to remember to mark your entrances. Try to just look at the implications of just pushing forwards and having people drop off a cliff and the other one taking over and so on. There are ways to do this that are a little bit more deliberate. All right, but the main problem with this is that the strings are not filled in. All right, so wow, I spent a lot of time on those first four bars, but I think that it's to a good use. So I am just going to assume for the rest of this score that any pitch that you assign in winds and brass that does not have it doesn't tell me, that none of them do, but like any single pitch is going to be the first, okay? All right. And then, like, if there are any issues about it, I will I'll add that together. Okay. So going forward, we have, like, does the melody start with elegance? I would say, da 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 da. So like here you choose to go down with your flute or flutes. So we never get da 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 da. It just jumps down and sort of falls down there. So it doesn't really complete the phrase. So that's one thing. The other is that there's no slur here. There's no smoothness. In fact, there are almost no slurs anywhere. There's just a little bit here and there, right? Like on these little guys. Maybe that is like a part of the copy paste kind of a thing, right? So, I mean, if you want it to be really kind of, individual, everything individually articulated, that's fine, but you just run the risk of it sounding choppy. Do you know what I mean? This is really cool. The viola's down in here, but I feel that they would need to be supported, right? This is they're the weakest dynamically of the string section, right? And you're giving them a lot of responsibility in the middle of all of this other stuff, right? Could you have spared a horn to support this? Yeah, so just watch out about that, like about like dropping things and putting different functions in the melody and the harmony out of order, right? So, but I mean, I see what you're doing here. You're sort of using the first flute as resonance for the oboe, right? You know, and then you don't want this to continue on. You want your little ripple here, but you have a piccolo that would you could do it an octave higher, right? Then here you got this roll here in the harp. Um, Instead of putting an ottava over the bass clef, maybe you could have put this a two-part writing and just put this chord in the treble clef where it belongs without an ottava mark, right? Just, yeah, try not to put an ottava over a left-hand part in bass clef, okay? Unless there is also an ottava part over the right-hand part, right? It should just, yeah, this just is a really odd way of scoring things. I mean, it's understandable what needs to be done, but it's just not the way that your harpist is going to want to read it. And this goes really well with this. It should be marked mezzo forte instead of mezzo piano if you want it to stand out. But right in here, where you start pushing everything forwards, mezzo forte and your glockenspiel, and then just everything getting loud again, and all of this brass tuba and trombones in their middle register at the same exact area as the harp, pretty much. And then these horns on top of that, nobody's going to hear this harp whatsoever. If these pitches were like 2 octaves higher, maybe you would hear it. But right now, you're just a waste of your harp player. Okay, but there's a place where you could use them that you didn't. But we'll get to that in a minute. So, melody starting with elegance. That's the question in my evaluation criteria, and I think you're not really going for elegance here. You're going for like sprightliness, right? So I think you got your intention, right? Is there a natural flow to the accompaniment? I would say yes. I really like the use of the horns and the middle strings here, and the and bassoons and so on. I think that works out really nicely. The trombones. A lot of what you're doing in trombones and so on could just have been left in the in the other horn part, right? And just like had it be all horns, and you get a much clearer, more cohesive sound that blends with the strings a lot better, right? Cool clarinet part. I don't think there's any need for you to use a marcato mark here. This is piano, right? You're saying like hammer this. Just put a little accent if you want it stressed slightly, or maybe even just get rid of the staccato and the marcato and put a little tenuto mark, right? And it just gives it a little bit more, gives it a little bit more oomph. Yeah, and then is there a natural transition to octaves? I would say that there is like is there an inevitable, what I mean by natural is just that it feels like the octaves just emerge right out of the orchestration. Here, I feel that they are like the change to octaves it's not forced or anything. It doesn't feel unnatural, but it doesn't feel like it is all part of one organic evolution of the sound, right? That's what I'm saying. So I couldn't say that it is, and you've got a huge amount of weight here, with the tuba and, and your trumpets and so on and so forth, right? This really, the actual sound that you would get here would really be more of a brass and wind sound than really an all-together orchestral sound, right? It's just pretty heavy in the brass here, I would say, for this type of pastoral scoring. However, like if you're going for a big kind of Hollywood kind of a sound, it's nice. It's pretty good. I would change the way that the strings are scored if that were so. like more, kind of focusing on the octaves, just like have the cellos either, like take away this kind of stuff and just leave all this to the brass and make the cellos be more part of either part of the octaves above or the bass below. Right. All right, so now we get to this section right in here. Does this contrast with the theme? Yes, it does, sort of. I mean, it's flutes and oboes here, and then it's flutes and oboes here, right? But adding the strings and the clarinets onto that, I think it's not really a contrast of timbre. It's just more adding to it, right? So it's more strength. So, I mean, do you really want this to be ta 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 ta, or maybe if you're the flute player, ta 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 ta, right? Do you really want that ta 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 ta, or do you want slurs ta ta ta? One thing is for sure, maybe people are getting sick of me saying it, but I really feel that this should be leggermente, right? Isn't that what it said in in Beethoven's directions to his pianist? And same thing with the melody. Anything that's getting a melodic part here should be marked dolce. This piano marking should go back here, right? So piano dolce for all the melodic parts, and anything where the melody emerges could also say dolce. Well, it's just really not really necessary by the time you get past the second bar. But here leggermente, right? What does that mean? It means to play with a certain flashy agility, right? Just like very lightly and delicately. But just like make it just like casual virtuosity, right? And why take that out? Isn't that something that the players should know, right? Anybody playing 16th notes for these two bars, right? They should get the leggermente marking. Now here, at 120, these 16th notes are possible on cello, but they're just clumsy. You know what I mean? I mean, they're doable, but they could be played. They could be played evenly. But I mean, look, you got a harp right here. Right? The harp would do it so much more elegantly, and you could play it in octaves, right? And then just get much more sound out of it, and you would actually hear it here because there isn't too much tone weight, right? Just if there's no competition here except for bassoons, a little bit of contrabassoon below there, the harp would stand out beautifully and would play much more smoothly than than the cellos going plucky plucky pluck right in here, right? And then just have the cellos here with the bass clarinet. I think that works out really great. But if you want these all separately articulated, I'm not critiquing you aesthetically here. I'm just saying, like, have you thought of that, right? One thing that you should just really be aware of, though, is with this much weight, right? How many string players or how many violin players are in a standard orchestra? 16 firsts, 14 seconds, right? So that's 30 players. So you have 30 violin players playing the same part here, right? They're going to absorb anything that the oboes and the clarinets are doing into themselves, into their sound. It'll make it thicker and more intense, but you're not really going to hear the oboes and the clarinets unless they play out. And then above them, the flute here, you might be hearing it in the mock-up, but in just a normal situation, normal recording situation, especially with a resonant hall, the sound of all these violins will absorb the sound of the flutes. Read my my tip. It's in, I think it's in my second book of tips, the case of the disappearing flute, right? So that's just something that the classical masters knew was going to happen, and they scored it intentionally. Here I would say piano subito. Anything that is coming off of this crescendo here, you have to say piano subito, but just to let them know, that it just like that there is no confusion here, right? So anything coming in at the end of the crescendo mark, piano subito. That's just the proper way to do it. I mean, in some ways it's obvious, but you never know. Somebody might be saying, well, maybe I should start a little softer so that we go crescendo to the piano, right? It's like punctuation. It's musical punctuation. Okay, so all that other stuff aside, I feel this is pretty nicely done, right? Okay, and now, I like the piccolo in here. The piccolo actually has more chance of being heard, right, than the flute. I feel just because of its more individual sound. Okay, emphatic color of line, right? Yeah, da 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 da, and like you start off mezzo forte. That's nice. Everybody's very emphatic here. So, just something to understand here is that is like remember I was saying that the strings are going to take over here. Now here, like the trumpet is going to take over, and so are the bass trombone and tuba are really going to absorb what's going on here. What is going? And speaking of things that are going on, what is this? Was this a triplet that jumped the line and then you couldn't figure out how to fix it? And I don't know, maybe is this possible in MuseScore? So, anyways, this should have been fixed before you sent it to me. Bum 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 bum. Okay, all right. So the bass line here is da 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 C D G D G. Right? It is not da 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 da. All right. Yes, we want the seventh of C in here, right? For the for the D7 chord, but don't put the seventh into the bass line, right? Just have it be D, and then add the seventh to the middle of the sound picture. You have so much weight on this bum bum. It's like it's improper bass function, right? That you want if you leave it on a D, then the D wants to go to the G, right? It's just really basic common practice harmony. Right, da 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 da. It's just it's just like it just messes up Beethoven's intentions. Put the seventh in the middle, right? So I would say put this C here in the bassoon up here in the middle. Right? It's just better voice leading. There's no need for this to go piccolo to like this is the weakest part right here, just getting down into this first octave of piccolo. You get a much stronger effect if you just start off on a high G in your flute, right? There's just no need for the piccolo to be involved at all. I would just say a flutes to match the first violins here. That would work really great. And then here oboe, bum 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 bum. Like what if the oboe went all the way to this F sharp here and then jumped up to double the flute here so that you wouldn't lose too much color. I don't know. And then this could be a clarinet part, right? And then the oboes could be doubling the flutes. All right, and then I don't think that this is right. Da 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 ba bum dun 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 dun. Right? Don't drop your melody, right? Just have it keep going straight up there, right? You already have the A and the B here in the second violins. There's zero need for your first violins to just be ineffectual here. Let them finish their thought, right? Don't cut the nose off, right? It's the same thing as here, like dropping this G. Let your lines complete themselves the way that they're composed, all right? So this is going to be heavily, especially with the use of the bassoon family instruments, right? And your brass. This is going to sound very brassy, especially as you don't have any kind of diminuendo or anything written here. Wow, I see an adue marking in here, but how can we have adue when you have intervals, right? Was this intended to be like, where could this be? I'm thinking there is no, like every instrument part here that is that has two instruments is playing intervals, right? So why is the adue here? Maybe this was intended to be over here in the trumpets? Anyways, but just be aware, the force of the trumpets here is really going to take over the sound, right? I like this little, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. I like these little triplets in here in these horns. It's very, very cool. All right. So, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done here. I feel that the balance is off a little bit. The brass is tending to take over. There's some strange weaknesses built into the string section, and more than I have said would probably be needed to be covered in like an orchestration, or like a formal orchestration lesson. There are a couple of wrong notes right in here, and the balance is kind of off right here, and the harp scoring is not too, like the same thing with the glockenspiel and so on, right? Why is the harp at piano and the glockenspiel at pianissimo these two very weak instruments, while everything else is also at piano, right? Shouldn't these be stronger? So yeah, so there's just a lot of little adjusting and tweaking and stuff to do. But like you sent me this massive page of orchestration with like different approaches and everything. It's like it's not really linear. It's like it's not a thing where one thing leads to the next thing leads to the next thing, and they're all interconnected, and I can talk about it, holistically. So that's why this is about a half an hour long. When usually like these evaluations are more like 15 to 20 minutes. But anyways, but it was worth it. It was really fun to look at. It was just so many very cool ideas. But yeah, but just maybe some basic, just a little bit of basic balance, and maybe do some more score reading, some Mahler, some Strauss, some some film scores if you can get your hands on them, and so on, like Omni or Chris Siddle, and just like looking at the way that some things are constructed. I mean, there's a lot of beauty to what you're doing in some of these more complex, multi-layered textures, right? But there's just lots of little adjusting things to do. It's just there's hours of work to be done on this page, and I can't do that. Can't spend all the time on this. But I'm really, really glad that you sent it to me, because it was a real kick in the pants. So thank you so much, Alexandre. I really, I really found it really stimulating, and it was so different, and such a really great change of pace to have a more cinematic score, in amongst many other different types of interpretations. So speaking of which, let's take a look at the third score of this compilation now. All right, Mason. So I am actually really positive about a lot of what you've done here. Okay, there's some little mistakes in here I think I can help fix with you, but I really just want nobody out there to be misjudging the quality of what Mason is doing here, just because the sound set that he's using is somewhat, it's just very, very basic. And I would say, like if people are going to be critical of your sound set, Mason, then I mean that's just the way that it is. Some people don't really need it, and so on. But like I would say, if you are trying to get work, say you're working with a choreographer, or you're doing orchestrations where really like the mock-up is what's going to be used in the performance, like say for a dance performance, or like maybe in a small budget kind of a film or whatever, then yeah, you really do need to get a better sound set. I'm assuming that this is Muse score, so it's probably like their basic maybe free sounds or whatever. I need to learn more about Muse score. So yeah, so they're just like very very tinny sounding winds, and kind of gargly sounding brass and strings and so on. So it just really didn't convey, right? However, like looking at the scoring that you were doing, you were really trying to play by the rules of the period, right? Just trying to score pitches that could be that could be used in by period instruments. Now, one thing that you have to understand is period or not, right? Or like, well, okay, so in the period, your horns in C basso would not have a key signature. You would just write in any B flats that showed up, and the same thing would be true of your trumpets in C, right? I was looking at this C7th here, knowing that you were intending this to be scored for period natural brass, and then seeing that there wasn't a flat sign, right? So just be careful about that stuff, right? So key signatures are cool for trombones, but for horns and trumpets in this period, you wouldn't have any, right? Now, for horns and trumpets in any period, some might argue you don't really need key signatures at all, and that is something not so much from purists or archaic people, but from the players themselves. A lot of most players that I've talked to don't really need them. I mean, they're if they're in certain kinds of scoring and they're in things where there are certain key changes, and especially where the key is a very important part of the identity of the piece. Say like with crossover scoring, where there's like lots of it's like pop charts basically, or like maybe with some band music and so on. And especially like using cornets instead of concert trumpets and so on, band horns instead of concert horns, then naturally there's going to be key signatures, right? But like in top level concert music, I just really, seeing as how we're moving away from key signatures in, why have a big fight over including them, right? This is the way that I look at it. So all that aside, I really like the way that you try to play by the rules, but I will observe one little thing here. Here you've got your second trumpet, your second bassoon doing zero, doing nothing, right? Why not give your second bassoon player this low stuff down here in your C basso horn, right? Then you don't have to worry about going too low, and you also don't have to worry about adding these stopped pitches, which are really, really rather ridiculous and ineffectual. Just like the lower you push a stopped pitch on a horn, the more farty it sounds, right? So it's stopped pitches are best, like within the range of the written, within the written range of the staff of F horn, they sound really great, right? But like dropping farther and farther below the staff, and especially with C basso horns, there's really a limit to how effective your stopped pitches are going to be. Why not give this lower line here to your second bassoon player who's just doing nothing, and then have just like first horn here in C basso, or both horns go C G C, right, rather than C G F, C G C, and then you could have that in octaves even, right? Or you could even go like you could have your second horn going C C C, right? And then here you could have in octaves, you could have octave Cs. So I think that would just be a way better period use of those elements, right? And you might not even need trumpets, but I mean, it's kind of cool that you're experimenting, and like, who knows where you would have taken this if you had done the entire movement, which I would have been really curious to see, right? I think you did some really, really interesting work here. So just looking at this and using my inner ear as my mock-up orchestra, which is what I usually do. And I like to have the mock-ups because I want to know what the orchestrator thinks they're hearing, and also I want to have some sort of reference for the people who watch these videos. However, I have my own way of playing things back in my head as I see the score. This is kind of cool, like using the lower winds. It's very Brahmsian, right? Using like a four-part chorale. In the lower winds. Ta 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 ta. put the turn sign well after the downbeat. Don't put it on the downbeat, because then you get a tight turn right on the beat. Ta-da-da, ta. What you want is ta-da-da, not ta-da. All right, so don't put it right on the downbeat. Put it after, all right? The players can figure it out from there. But you could hear that, like, your mock-up was trying to obey your directions. Like, your mock-up goes ta-ta. It needs to be ta-da-da, right? Yeah, and then like you're just adding a little bit of flute here to thicken the clarinets. Now, this flute is going to do almost nothing. It's going to add a little bit of tone weight, a little bit of color to the clarinet here. But it's not the most effective, and especially coming in the middle of a phrase, like slurring right into the middle. Ta ta ta. Suddenly add a color, right? It might have been better to just have the flute come in a beat early, right? But it's not the most effective thing, but it's something you can definitely add. I feel that like da, 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 da. You did make a mistake here. You scored this as 16th notes, not as 32nd notes, right? As demi-semiquavers. So these notes should be twice as fast as you've scored them, half the duration, and then you end up with an eighth note at the end, and that equals one full quarter note beat, right? And then you don't need this rest here, right? So you did a slight weird thing here, and maybe it's because like you couldn't sort of manage how things were going to end up and so on, or maybe you misinterpreted that. Did you notice how like the at this tempo that you had here, the timpani and the bass drum were going right? If you want to get rid of that, add another beam to your tremolo, so it's more of a roll, right? So very, very slow tempos. You want your if you're using the tremolo beam to indicate a roll, you should at least have like 4. Try that. Just get out your file, okay, Mason, and then just change this to quadruple beam in your bass drum and your timpani, and just see if you get a better roll. All right. But maybe rewrite this as 32nd notes, right? Ending with an 8th note. It's got to be da 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 da, not da 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 da. I mean, think about it. Like the turn is part of the expression of this little thing at the end, right? It's like they're both ornaments. Ta 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 ta. Right? So like they relate to one another. This turn and this as 32nd notes. So, do I think that this sets up what follows effectively? Yes. Nice work. All right, so now we get into this. What if you were to leave the slurs as you got them here in your clarinets, but divide up the slurs a little bit better here so that they're better for bowing, right? Because here you got up, down, up, down, up. Or up, down, up. Or the player will go up, down, down, up, down. So it's not very good bowing scheme. So what your concertmaster will probably do is cut this slur in half, so they can go up, down, up, down, up, and then they'll do the same thing here. A slur every 2 beats. Up, down, up, and then one long bow for this last down bow. Down. Now, I'm not saying to write in the bow markings, the up and down bow markings. Those are for the players, right? Let them do it, unless a player has gone over your score, and your score is going to be used in a sort of like a touring situation for like a crossover artist, where like there is one rehearsal, right? And so the players are like, they might not even have had a chance to read the music, and they're going to assume that it's more basic. And they're going to sit down and they're going to look at the markings that were left on the score by the last concertmaster, right? Or the first concertmaster of the tour. And this is all fine. Yeah, I would say continue on your slurs, right? Why is this ta ti ta ta ti ta 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 ta? What's going on here? All right. Do you really want this to be smooth but everything else to be disconnected? I think you forgot to add your slurs. Right? Yeah, and this is all fine. The structure here. So, I would say, like, is there a natural flow to the accompaniment? Sure. Maybe add some slurs. Does this expand without clogging up? Oh, yes. Very nice. I mean, it's just really a shame that the mock-up doesn't convey, right, the possibilities here. And, yeah, I like the little natural horn, That really helps to, to add the half pulse right in there. The syncopation. And then, so what you're doing here with your upper winds is a very nice Beethoven touch, but the problem is that you didn't compensate for the change of harmony, right? You ended up with a minor seventh chord when you got to the third beat. Why? Because you didn't change this back to an F fifth, and this to an F fifth or an A third. Would be better, right? So just really be careful about the harmony, right? Dun 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 dun, right? So maybe you have a situation where you have E over like an F fifth or an F chord, right? And then like it walks down, and then you have a sort of a B flat kind of a chord over the root of F, or the it's really not a root in that function. It is the bottom note of a 6/4 chord. But then you have to end up with a root F chord, right? And here you just have this, this kind of, these E6s just kind of blindly chunking along here, right? Why, right? The first one could be G6ths as you have scored them here, but the next one should be D6, right? D to D and B flat, and then you should end up with you could end up with a C6th or an F fifth or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it has to be functions, or it has to be harmonic parts of an F chord. Okay. All right, now, so that needs to be fixed. Then I would say natural transition and the, tick the box, tick the box, tick the box. Except for one little thing. Why does this need to be loud? What does it say in the piano score? Piano dolce. Right? Maybe you don't need to get loud until here. What if this were just piano dolce? Try that out. Mark it piano dolce and have this nice, like the way that you've got it here, everybody's going crescendo to fortissimo. So here's what I want you to do. Go take your, have like a copy of your score, like an extra copy of your file. And then just change this to piano dolce and, crescendo to mezzo forte in the middle, and change the harmony here, please. And then listen to it and tell me what you think. I love the fact that you used leggermente here. And, okay, mezzo piano, fine. It doesn't have to be. A due oboes. The problem with a due oboes and a due bassoons is that you lose the individual subtleties of the instrument. I think it would be much, much better here, especially for considering the pinpoint accuracy that you need for your staccatos. I think it would be way better to have a single oboe and a single bassoon, right? Right? So like, anytime you have two oboes playing a due, right? Like that means that the oboe will be less individually expressive, right? Because they have to listen to each other. It'll be more trumpet-like, right? You might be thinking, oh, well, I want a trumpet there. Okay. Well, if that's so, then give it to your trumpet, right? And give it to like a modern trumpet, not a natural trumpet. Yes, it's all fine. A little bit of bass drum, Yeah, it's maybe a little bit of overemphasis here. What if the bass drum were marked piano, right? And everything else was mezzo piano. Or maybe everything was piano and the bass drum was pianissimo. And then, then here, like, emphatic color of line, you start forte. I think that's kind of fun. Just like starting. Okay, now I was listening to your mock-up, and your glissando wasn't a portamento kind of glissando where you're sliding up in pitch. It was like a right. It was like a little scale from the A to the F. So if that's what you want, you should write it in. Okay. Because, in diatonically speaking, that is 5 pitches, right? So if you wrote a little pentuplet, right? You wrote A, B flat, C, D, E on the way up to this F. I think it would actually be better than going, like just starting on the A string for the cellist and just pushing up to the F. I think that sounds a little weird, But I really love the mock-up having the little scale in there. So put the scale in, I think. Write it in. And I think that's really fun. And it's nice to have cello in there, So do you set up does the harmonic density set up what follows? It's interesting that like you it's since you start loud and then you end up like going diminuendo to soft. It's like the necessity of the harmonic elements in this phrase to set up some sort of chorale that follows is like less psychologically important, but it still is functionally important, right? So I think that you did a good job, and I love this thing in the violas. I would double this with say with like you've got a bassoonist doing nothing, or maybe double this with, say, like one of your horns. Okay, but I mean, these aren't really pitches that are. Let's see this. Yeah, so this could be done. Like this is available on an F horn. Yeah, and so is this C, I think, but not the D. So maybe on a trombone. Put this on trombone at like mezzo forte or mezzo piano, right? And then I think that you got this figured out. And I love, like that you start off here like in harmony, right? It's such a lovely little thing right in here. Yeah, and then a duet flutes on top, right? So this isn't the most balanced scoring that you could have possibly done, right? But it's still rather charming. Yeah, it's very dense in the strings in the middle with a little bit of flute in the color. You were trying to go for like a Beethoven kind of a sound here, and I respect that. Okay. It still has a few little things, but I can't spend too much time talking about it. Then diminuendo down to like, and you just what I totally respect. Like you wanted this to be all about the horns, and you had these horn intervals in here, right? And they work beautifully. You don't have to write in half stopped and fully stopped and everything else. The player knows. Your natural horn player is going to know what. But yeah, I would say take out the second C horn part, or like they're all numbered. They're all numbered the same way as if it were a 4-horn section with everybody playing modern horns, right? So this is first and second horn. This is third and fourth horn, right? So take out the 4th horn part here, or change the 4th horn part so it's sort of like, say, octave C and then C and G and then back to octave Cs. Right, and then here just go octave C, C, C. Right, so try that out and try giving this here to your second bassoon player, and I think it'll just solve all your problems immediately. All right, and you just get a beautiful, beautiful sound of that horn chorale that you want so much. And I just really like the little reaction, right? The staccatissimo, bum, bum. Da, da, da. It's really smooth. Okay, so when you have repeated notes like this where everybody else is playing these smooth slurs, there should be a slur for the second voice as well, right? Then you should score it as portato, and I think also in the bassoons, right? So that would be a slur with you do that. Put the slur over tenuto articulation marks, right? So same thing here. So just have these C's with, so it's the same exact pitch, right? So just have them sort of floating on that C. And you could do the same thing here, right? And that will, what's really nice about portato is that it blends in with slurred melodies and slurred motion around it, right? It feels slurred, and yet you hear the distinct articulation of each note and its duration and so on. All right. So those are my thoughts on your score, Mason. I just really loved it a lot, and I don't need the mock-up to tell me whether or not it was scored nicely. It's a really nice attempt at period scoring. And I just feel like fix a bunch of stuff in this, experiment a little bit with your dynamics and so on, and have a listen to it and tell me what you think. And see, it's been 2 years since you gave this to me, so you might have a way better mock-up sound now, and you might not even be working in MuseScore anymore if this is MuseScore. So just play around with it a little bit, and see how it sounds. All right, and thank you so much for being so patient with me. Not a single one of you guys has gotten on my case about about my health, and about I'm the person who's getting on my case. All right, I just really don't like the fact that it took me so long to get to all of these. But I'm very happy to be looking at it now, and I think you did a great job. All right, so thank you so much. So let's take a look at the 4th out of 5 of these selections in this last compilation of website subscriber scores. A lot of very clever, imaginative ideas here, Brandon, and another one, just like Mason's before, that where the mock-up really doesn't do any justice at all to the actual scoring, right? And in fact, I would say that the mock-up does even more disservice to your score than Mason's, but at the same time, that does not to say that what you did is wrong or right? That has no bearing on it. So I've got my own internal orchestra. I can look at a piece of music on a page, and in most cases, except for some of the most complex work, I can just play it back myself and just hear what's going on. So that's what I'm going to do in order to evaluate what you've got here. And I'm going to just play exactly by the rules and just, use the evaluation criteria and everything else. So in this case, our first question is, does the intro set the mood effectively? And I would say, you have this very kind of nice, you are aiming for the period, right? And it's not quite there yet. But it's still, there are still some qualities to it that speak from that period. Let's start with the introduction here. Now, I've noticed that you have kind of marked whether pitches are open or stopped, right? You're saying 3/4 stopped, and these are all open, and maybe that's fine for your own reference. But they're completely not needed in the part. Anybody who plays a natural horn, or even anybody who plays a modern horn and is used to reading natural parts, they're going to know what to play, okay? They don't need you to tell them. It's the same thing as if you were to write bowing like up and down bow marks in your score, right? You don't need that. That's the concertmaster's job. And in many cases, like it's just so obvious what to do on the face of it that sometimes some scores have very few, if any, kind of bowing marks, right? So it's nothing that you need to add. So looking at the way that this is constructed, we have this kind of this G fifth right in here, just kind of floating there. The since this is an instrument in G, it's exactly the same as like alto flute. If anybody out there has ever scored for alto flute and then seen a transposed part, right? So the pitches sound down a perfect fourth, right? So this is a G fifth with a G below middle C. Right? So we've got that floating in the background. We've got the contrabasses down here, right? And your bassoonist could possibly hold, like if your horn players could hold the note this long, then your bassoonist could definitely hold the note for that long. So if you had really wanted this to be just a one solid pad there, then you could have had your bassoon player just hold this, right? Now, you have a lot of like, I feel that you overdo things a little bit with like repeated notes, right? Like, so for instance, you've got this dun, 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 right? And like you take pains to have a repeated, like the G to repeat with the same, that sort of same pattern, right? Here we have clarinets in A, and then you have like the same G here, right? It's like sounding like you've got like a quadruple octave here, right? So G, like this is G at the very, very bottom, sounding an octave lower, right? And then we've got an octave higher, as written, the first bassoon, and then an octave higher than that, we've got the G fifth in the G horns. And then an octave higher than that, we've got these G's going dun 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 dun, and we've got the same thing going here, bum bum bum. I think this is gilding the lily a little bit, right? Because does it really give any kind of energy to the da 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 da? I could see it here. I mean, I guess that's all right, but I don't know if it really does much else except for to kind of like confuse the beautiful serene sound of the pad, right? Maybe if you went up to D, right? So it was da dee dee dee, right? Now, if you are going to have a lot of repeated notes, but and just one single slur here, why don't you put the slur here, right? Because here's where the motion is. Da ta ta ta, because like this is really where the breath belongs, right? So ta 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 ta, it just feels a little too deliberate, right? But if you put the slur here instead of here, right, then you have motion in all of the parts except for the cellos here, and you can just make this into a tie if you like, right? And then just like I was saying before in the previous score, that the turn should happen after the downbeat, right? So here you got tam. When you put it here, you don't like when you put the turn right on top of the pitch, you don't hear the pitch on the downbeat. So put it afterwards. So it's ta da ta. Do you see what I'm saying? Don't go ta ta. Put it ta ta ta. Right? So just like, and then this is fine. Ta ta. So this right here, I feel like in terms of being period, like the way that you've scored it, it sounds very spacey, and it's very much like new agey sounding, right? What you need to do here, okay, tell you what, Brandon, just get out a copy of your score as I'm going through this, okay? Like if you have two separate screens or two separate systems or whatever. So put your copy of the score on the other system, and then try some of these, like this rewriting of your slurs and pitches and so on that I'm recommending here, and just see, like maybe play the mock-up, or just like play it in your head or work it out on the piano, and just see if you agree with me. All right. So here, what if you had, instead of the C just holding in like this C in the seconds, just clouding everything that's happening in this yada da da dum. What if you had your second violins going da da, and then just holding the B? So you have da da, and so then you just end up just go da da, and then hold the B and tie it to here. And the same thing here. This G should continue on, right? So just like everybody continue on to the fermata and put the fermata over the quarter note. Right? So you have a sort of confusing thing here where you have fermata on the half beat, but you don't have any fermata on the downbeat on these parts, right? So these should be fermata. Make this into a quarter note, lasting all the way through. I've already talked about this, how it's an eighth note in the parts, or in the score, in the piano score, but it really is played as a quarter note. The pianist will hold their thumb down on this while the top of their hand goes yada da da dum. Right, so it'll last all the way through till they're ready to play the next thing. So just make this into a quarter note with a fermata over it, right? And then here go da dum. So 32nd note tied to a dotted 16th, slurring to a dotted 16th, tied to this eighth note here, right? And then or you could have two 32nd notes in a row, and then the second one is tied to a dotted eighth note, right? So there's just a bunch of different ways that you could do it. And then as far as these things are concerned, you could just have quarter note with a fermata, or quarter rest with a fermata on it, right? And I feel that these pitches should also, like if this pitch is a quarter note with a fermata, then this one should be as well, right? And you might be thinking, well, I wanted all this stuff to back off, so it was just this low drone and these pitches up here. And if so, that's fine too. All right. So do I feel that sets up this? Does this set the mood effectively? Yes, that's nice. Okay, then here, ta da da ta da. Why not just have the player tongue the downbeat, ta ta ta, right, rather than ta ta. Come on, ta, right? I think that just so much more emphatic, right? And then, it's just too bad. It just broke my heart to hear what the mock-up did with this, like, it sounded like machine noises here, like a, slightly out of balance clothes washer or something, right? But the idea behind it, the actual, what it should sound like, it's fine. And then you have more of this sort of, clarinets adding a little bit of harmony. This could have been done an octave higher in clarinets or in oboes. But it's a nice idea, right? Now, I wouldn't push forward like you're thinking of like the da 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 da. You're taking the crescendo and you're putting it a bar early, and you're crescendoing into a drop off, right? Don't do that. Why don't you just wait to crescendo here, right? Then bum 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 bum. So, if you want that sort of like this sort of kind of nice, busy, kind of slightly choppy sound behind these beautiful, smooth slurs here in your violins, then it's fine with me. I don't think it's I mean, is it period or not? I mean, you hear things like this in Haydn, so yeah, everybody should everybody should have the same dynamic, and they should all push forward to the same dynamic in the middle. If you're going to put a piano to forte here, right, then it should be, at least piano to mezzo forte, if not forte as well. All right. And then you go diminuendo back to P. I think that the P should be here on this note, right, in all these parts, right? And then leggermente, yada-da-da. And in octaves, that's very, very cool. Oh, just about my criteria, I think that, like, taking those things that I said into account, I think that it does the job, all right? So leggermente, you put in the words. I am so happy about that. And we have the octaves here in the violins. Ta, ta, ta. It's such a cool idea to have the flute and the oboe answer, and then cellos, da, da. Right, and then ta. And okay, so here's where it falls down a little bit. Just really be aware that this is going to be incredibly bright up here, right? Especially just coming in forte. Like you just have this sudden da 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 da. Do you know what I'm saying? Because so this is strong. Da, 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 da. You just only have this guy shouting on top of it, right? So watch out is all I've got to say here. But this is very cool in bassoon. But yeah, yeah. So there's some funky parts here in the harmony, right? Like, just, you should try to keep your harmony as basic as possible, because the way that you are kind of adding a lot of cushion in here and just experimenting with the harmony, that for sure isn't period like, right? If you were attempting to keep this in Beethoven's period, this is totally not like the approach that you're taking here with the harmony. Yeah. So I would say, just like at the very, very least, go over the harmony that you've got here and just make it as absolutely plain as possible. What is the harmony here? Right? So right in here, it is just as plain Jane as possible, kind of D7th, right? Going right back to G major. Right, and the G major should be supported at the root, not throwing in like a sort of a E minor 7th idea or whatever, right? But I mean, like, if you intended to be exploratory with the harmony and to just really play around with it and stuff like that, then I would say, like, just do whatever the hell you want. It's just fine with me. The next question is whether or not it's constructed very well. And to that, I would say, like, putting your cello way up here, and just like having this the way that this is all set up in the terms of the architecture is a little weak, to not to beat up on you or anything like that. But there just needs to be a little bit more, like if you had octaves in here with your bassoons, or maybe you had the octave component built into the into divisi cellos, or maybe into the basses, then that would be a lot more, that would work a lot better. But just like this, the biggest problem here is the intense brightness here of the clarinet in this very high register here. I mean, it's not nothing unplayable about it, but it's just going to be a sudden blast of brightness here. Where if this were in flute, right? You, like, these pitches here are already being expressed in, partially. Like, we've got an oboe right in here, and then, like, you've got I think that maybe you were, like you were just some of the planning. Well, yeah. Right. So this is an octave below the oboe, and then yeah. So there's just a little, yeah, just like the strangeness of the harmony right in here, and like not lining up with certain things is throwing me off. So yeah. So a lot of these pitches could be reshuffled, right? So like you could have leave the second part the way that it is, take the second oboe part and give it to the first clarinet. You could take the you could take the second part of the flute and the first part of the oboe and then just make that into an oboe part, and then leave this in second flute and then have this come over the top in first flute, and then I think that you would have less jarring of a just that sudden spot. It's just like turning on, like just throwing in this very intense reedy sound just like right there, and especially at a crescendo to a forte, that's right the peak right there. I just feel it's just like suddenly turning on a spotlight into your orchestral color. Right? And this, like the way that this is working, da 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 da. I just really love the voice crossing, the everything like headed towards each other. Okay, but like the basic idea here is solid, but you just need more of a cushion. Do you know what I mean? I think that I would want this to have some support from cellos, and I would want this to have some support from clarinets, right? Just like make it into more of an integrated idea. Because the way that it is now, it's really a bit barren. By the time that you have a voice crossing here in the bassoon and the strings, you end up with a lot of unintended consequences, right? You have the bite here of the C sharp against the D, right? So, and then we have the two C sharps happening one after the other, right? So it almost sounds like a held note. And then we have the D hitting at the same time. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's just like the single bassoon here and just violins. I just would want this to be filled in a little bit more, right? And then you got a lot of pitches being doubled here. Maybe like you could have divisi cellos. One set of cellos is doubling this with the bassoons, and the other one is like taking care of some of these functions, right? Why couldn't this be in? Why is this suddenly in basses? So it's always better to like in a situation like this. It's always better for you not to have divisi basses, but to have just basses and then the upper part going to the cellos, right? It's just much clearer, and especially how you need that to kind of resonate with what's going on here in the G horns, right? So this just needs a little bit more work. In fact, I feel it needs a lot more work. Okay, but it's still a very cool idea, and I like the way that like you kind of have this little the winds answer and then the strings answer, and then you have like a little soft tutti here without the lower winds. So yeah, here's a situation where you could have had where you have this you have repeated notes here, these repeated Ds under a slur. Right, so I think that one of these lines, this of course is probably going to be played divisi. So, here you got D, B, A. So that should be stems pointing down, second voice, and then first voice should be portato, right? So the slur over the top with tenuto marks, right? So that way you get that sort of floating sound, which fits in so well with slurs around it. Right, so you get the individual articulation of the notes, but it fits in smoothly with the rest of the slurred phrase in the strings, right? And the same thing with these Ds at the bottom here. So two separate parts, divisi. Even though it could be played, this could be played portato non-divisi if you want to, right? But I think it's better to go to have this be split into two parts. The upper part slurred, the bottom part portato, right, with a slur over it, but with tenuto marks. Okay, and then this is all fine. The same tenuto articulation for the horns, right? Alrighty, so just like some great exploratory ideas here. I really, don't take anything I said the wrong way. I actually like the big blast of color right in here, and I really love the opposing lines like headed for each other and smashing into each other. I think that's a really great idea, right? So, but it's like I just have to take into account like how careful you're being to be period with your horns and certain other touches, sort of make me think, oh, well, maybe there's, you kind of want to know whether or not this would be Beethoven-like. So that's what I'm sort of trying to guide you with. All right. So yeah, if even if you had like octaves here, like say you had your first and seconds in octaves, this were an octave higher, and then this part here, as written, would be down here, right? And then you had this doubled by cellos, right? And I think that would be really strong. And then if both of these parts had support from winds, then I think that it would be really, really nice. And then like maybe any unused instruments right in here could be used to help set up the harmony in the middle a little bit better, and then carry forward, right? But at the same time, I feel like that ruins your idea here, which is just to have like horns and bassoons at the end with a little bit of lower strings. So maybe that's the wrong. Maybe my suggestions for how to fix this up are totally wrong. Maybe there is no ideal way to do this, right? But it's still a really great idea. Anyway, that is what I've got to say about your orchestration here, Brandon. And just I'll just close by saying I just thank you so much for being patient with me, and letting me take the time I needed to get my health together, and for submitting such a cool, very. I would just say this is a unique take on the Beethoven. Like there's a period flair, and yet there's some experimentation going on here, which is just very, very cool. Some stuff I just have not seen in other entries. All right, so great work. All right, and now for our 89th and last entry of the website subscriber evaluations. Let's take a look at it now. All right, Martin. This is like the perfect antidote. This last selection is just like what a cure. How upbeat and triumphant, and just a great way to put a cap on all of these evaluations, all of these entries from my awesome website subscribers. And yeah, it just feels like there's a part of me that has not a single critical thing to say about it, right? And then there's another part that's immediately just waiting to just jump in and not tear it to pieces, but just advise you on a lot of different little things that you need to think about in preparing a score like this. Now, you'll probably notice immediately that like you submitted 2 screens to me. And I have taken the liberty of condensing them down to just like a single screen. I think there was like these last 3 bars or 4 bars or whatever. They were stretched out over like a big, huge page. And so I just took it, and I think it was either me or did I ask for this to be reduced? But anyways, like one way or another, things got smashed down to 1 page. All right. Well, what a humongous orchestra that you've got here, right? Now, and looking at all of these parts, you say piccolo, flute, oboe, English horn, clarinet, bassoon, right? You don't tell me how many of each that you intend. And if we really look at all of these parts, right, you really only have like 1 voice per part, right? Except for a few intervals here in your clarinet part and in your bassoon part, right? But really, were this a professional score, it really would be, you'd have to tell me how many flutes that you were intended to use in your ideal orchestra for this, and you would have to mark which guy was playing, right? So if it's just, if all you intended was just a single player, like for these top four staves, then what you've scored here is correct. But here you would have to say two clarinets in B flat, right? You can't just say clarinet. You have to say what the tuning is. And the same thing with the French horns. Like, you don't have to say French horns. This is a concert score. We know that, people call them French horns outside the orchestral world. Just call them horns. And if you can possibly manage it, have a bracket here, and then have just say horns floating in the bracket, like say 4 horns in F, right? 2 clarinets in B flat, 2 bassoons. Then here you say trumpets. We're getting into the plurals here. Then you have a trumpet solo, right? So that if you have a trumpet solo part, it really should be like the first trumpet part, and it would be above. So it's okay to have trumpet 1, and you don't even have to say solo. You could just write solo here when you have a solo or whatever. Just say, I would say trumpet 1 above, and then trumpets 2 and 3 would be below it, right? And these are also, you have to say trumpets in B flat. So trumpet 1 in B flat is what this is, and it would go above. Trumpets 2 and 3 in B flat, right? And then this would be trombones, right? Because we've got 2 parts, and you'd have to tell me which person is playing when and so on for all of these parts. And then tuba, it's always assumed to be a single player. Unless it's like Holst's planets or something, but those, even in that case, there's a tenor tuba and a bass tuba. Okay, and then harp, right, and so on, and timpani. Okay, so just a little bit of the disposition, like, and there's no need to leave out the adagio cantabile and the allegro ma non troppo, right, at 116. Here, should have a 4/4 marking here, not a bar of 1/4. And maybe that's the only way that, maybe that was your level of the way that you were using this particular notation application. And if so, I totally understand. But what it really should be is double bar here, quarter rests with fermatas on them, right? Quarter notes with fermatas on them, right? Because we have a fermata here on this 1/8 note. And then this should just be an incomplete bar, or a pickup bar that says 4/4 at the beginning, right? Okay, so that's just like the disposition of your score. I felt that it was important for you to know all that stuff, all right? Okay, so now let's get into the actual scoring. Okay, so here we've got a situation where you have done a ton of dynamic mixing, right? You have this clarinet part marked mezzo forte, and then it goes to English horn, which I thought was really gorgeous, right? And they're both marked mezzo forte. And then you have all these subsidiary parts in, a piano, right? Except for some harp octaves here, the only place where the harp appears. And it's, that's backed up with pizzicato in the cellos and so on. The pizzicato in the cellos is going to absorb a lot of what the horn tone is here. Right? So you might hear like the bottom note here of the harp, but the top note is going to just get sucked up by the intensity of the cellos. But I mean, adding it together, seeing as how you're trying to balance it or dynamically and so on, that I can understand. However, I just must point out to you that you don't really need to do this, right? You could mark the harp at mezzo forte or mezzo piano. And by the way, the dynamic mark should always go in the middle, just like with a regular piano part, unless the hands have separate dynamics. You could just be marking these wind solos as solo, right? And have the same dynamic as everybody else, and the players will play out, right? Now, of course, that might not be the way that it shows up, or might not be the way that it sounds in your mock-up, right? But yeah. So here we've got, like in our string scoring, like you have ties in some parts and not in others. It's kind of strange. And you have like cross voicings. You have the upper divisi violas playing unison, or actually playing not unison, playing harmony over the top of the violas, or the first violins. Sorry about that. It's right. Yeah, so I mean, it's a lovely idea to sort of have the violas over the top, and and kind of adding a kind of a cushiony sort of a thing. But what I would do is I would say just like all the more reason for everything to be very soft and smooth and subtle, right? Rather than just these very blank, bare notes with no slurs on them, right? You have these nice long stretches. The certainly in a situation like this, the these tie marks would be the reverse of how they're scored here, right? So these, and also the stem directions. So these stem directions would be pointing down, and the slurs would be under, right? They'd be under the note head, not over them. And then these note heads would be over, and so on. So somehow things got all switched around here with this application. So I would say it might be like if you just really want things to be nice and smooth and suave here in the way that you intend this, I would say slur the second beats, right? And if you're going to be playing A and then A again here, then I would say like get rid of the tie, right? But if you insist on the tie, then I would say tie this as well and then have a slur over everything, right? In fact, that's what I would recommend the most, right? Because when you play this A twice, you're distracting attention away from the clarinet part here, right? So that's probably what I would do the most if I were if somebody handed the score to me and said, "Hey Thomas, fix this up. It's going to be performed tomorrow." So I would probably say, "Okay, well, first thing we need to do is tie this, put a slur over that, right?" And then here I would do the same thing going the opposite direction. So slur over the top, and then this is going to be held. Slur there, right? So you just have nice, slow, even bows. Slur this, maybe even just slur this like this entire ending here. Right? And then of course these quarter notes should all be fermata, and it should end in an incomplete bar, right? And then followed by a pickup bar with a 4/4 on it. All right. So I feel, with all that in mind, and with the way that you've scored it, and just being absolutely honest here about the fact, like using English horn and the way that you have scored certain things, you're not really seriously thinking that this is period performance of Beethoven's period, or as Beethoven would have scored it, right? Because he almost never used harp, and the English horn was just like an incidental instrument for, say, Mozart and other people at that time. It wasn't really a standard member of the orchestra yet, and so on and so forth. And like you have a lot of pitches in your horns which suggest that you're using just today's modern valve horns, and piston or valve trumpets. Yeah, and trombones, like in the way that you use them here. Okay, so with all that in mind, I would say that this sets the mood for what follows it really beautifully, but just like make some of those changes, I would say, right? Okay, now going on to the pickup. Da, da, da. So like here I would say like it's I worry about things here, Martin, because I feel that you have just sort of dropped the slur here from the piano score, right? Without thinking about how these players need to bow things, right? Like this really, really long stretch of bowing here for the cellos is just really not a very good. It's just like the part itself is pretty good, but the slur is not very good, right? Just like it's not taking into account the need of the player to change their bow, or the playing it a louder dynamic and so on. And then there's also like no indication of who this oboist is, if this is the first oboist, if in case this were both, and like what dynamic are they starting at. This was mezzo forte before. This is mezzo forte suddenly down here, but like if you could not hear the first violin part at all right here, it was very weak compared to the rest of the orchestra. That's why, right? Is because it just like there was no, you didn't put a mezzo forte marking here. So yeah, so there's just a bunch of issues here. So like proofread your dynamics, proofread the parts, right, and what their function is. So you start off here. I would say like maybe you could chuck a slur over the top of these notes here, some of these other parts, right? And then here maybe slur this and then slur that, right? So it's ta ta, so up down, and then this just is totally way too long. Up, so get rid of the slur, and then slur this, slur that, and slur that. That way the bow motion will be down, up, down, right? Just as simple as can be. And then, like I would say, emulate that here as well. And as for this, like this is like a semi-portato, right? So why not just go all the way and have just the slur on this? Don't slur to here. So so this would be down and then up, 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 with just a slur over the repeated notes with a tenuto mark, and that gives a sort of a kind of a nice pulsing sort of a sound, which fits in beautifully with other slurred parts around it. And then this should also be ta, ta, right? So slur here and slur there, right? But don't slur across, do you know what I mean? Like just kind of slurring across into the downbeat. Did you watch my video on 12 common scoring errors about like, slurs all over the place that just don't really make a whole lot of sense and end up like taking away any kind of emphasis from the downbeat? That's what you've done here, all right? So you are a better orchestrator than that. So slur from here to there, slur from there to there, slur these beam groups, right? So, pizzicato, down, up, down, and so on. You see what I'm saying? Like just like slur this, then slur that, and so on. And then it's just way easier for the cellist, right? I like the function of the pizzicato. I like the little bits of timpani right in here. I am not going to complain about needing to be piano dolce with this because of just the whole scope of what you're doing. It's big and gutsy, and I actually like it. Like I'm gonna just take it as it is because I really love it as a triumphant ending to this whole list whole roster of 89 scores. All right, so let it be mezzo forte. The only thing I would say is like, why can't it get all the way up to forte here, right? Why does everything have to be so mezzo, right? Mezzo is a grayer color than just forte or piano, right? Just don't live in sort of the almost world, right? Like almost soft and almost loud. Just commit, right? Why can't this just be forte? Why can't this just be piano, right? It was just like there's when there's like no difference between the different restraint and force, then you just end up with a sound that like kind of never goes anywhere, right? Just go ahead and be forte, right? I like you using a little bit of restraint here, but like maybe that's an accident, right? Since everything else is marked mezzo forte. Perhaps it's better to have start off mezzo forte, mark your horns mezzo piano, and then go to a forte with everything else, and then and keep it mezzo forte in the horns if you don't want the horns to be too blasting. Now here you're like continuing on. This time you are doubling your violas and first violins together. And that's a very cool sound, And then here you're adding your double reeds to that. That's going to be a very intense sound. Okay. The problem is that you don't have much of a middle voice with the way that it is scored. The chord is not evenly scored across the top of the sound picture. Da 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 da. Nice. You go immediately to a nice, like in the piano score, to a big beautiful C7 chord, right? With B flat octaves and a C third in the middle, right? So that's like here you're giving us an E third, right? But I'm not really seeing the C all that prominently. Right? So what I think you need to do is like this. These three pitches right in here need to be doubled by somebody. You've got a second clarinet doing nothing. Why can't they help? Right? Okay, oboe and English horn working together with the violas and first violins. That's beautiful. The second violins could be doing more divisi in here if there were other parts that they needed to do. There could be more filling out of this chord, right? Okay, and I like this note right in here, but how loud do you want your trombones to be? I would say mezzo piano, right? So mezzo piano with all this brass stuff in here. You can leave your timpani mezzo forte. Yeah, and why mezzo forte here and then mezzo forte there? And why go diminuendo here? Yeah, you don't need to do any of that stuff. Yeah. And then here, you could go to a forte here, or you could just have like a couple of hairpins, just like what does Beethoven say in the score? Hairpins. He wants crescendo, diminuendo. So maybe you don't have to move up the dynamic levels at all. Just put in the crescendo, right? I wouldn't do this diminuendo you don't need to do that. Okay. Yeah, so, and then you've got this big arc here. This definitely should have, why is there this big, long, unbowable, well, it's bowable, but it's just it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of, getting the most out of the bowing of the players. Why is this big, long slur over this and not over these beautiful parts here? A big, long slur over all of these wind parts expressing this melody in octaves, right? One problem that you've got going on here is that you're leaving a huge gap, right? You have your first violins, violas, English horn, oboe, and flute, all playing in this terrific unison, right? And you have 2 octaves higher piccolo playing. Why not fill in the space in between them with the flute, right? None of these notes, with the way that you've scored everything and the strengths of the instruments and their sonorities and everything else, and especially with the horn right underneath it, nothing that the flute is saying here is going to make any difference whatsoever. So why not just push the flute up into that, fill the hole, right? And have it duet flutes, right? And then I would go back to a solo, or not solo, but just like a single flute there. And then I would say that you have had a natural transition to octaves and you have expanded without clogging up, right? That would tick my boxes. So with those suggestions, I'm making all these suggestions. The first suggestion I should have made to you, Martin, was to get out your file and see if you can make any of these changes to it, and then listen to the mock-up or just look at it and listen to it in your mind and see whether or not what I've said makes sense. All right, so seeing as how you're leaving out slurs, I can't tell whether or not you might have intended to slur these as well, right? So that's the problem with just being really unpredictable and not irregular with the way that you mark certain things, is that when we get to certain things, is like the players and the conductor will wonder, what? Yeah, I mean, is this really meant to be all individually articulated, but this slurred in this one long thing? And maybe he did intend to have slurs here, but we just don't know, right? So that's the problem here with the kind of irregularity of the way things are being dealt with. with that particular aspect of your scoring. All right, so let's just assume that you want it the way that it is. Okay. So my first question is, does this contrast with the theme? Yes, it does, right? Because it's just like, maybe we're coming off of this a very, very fluty thing, especially if you're going to jump these flutes or the flute or flutes up an octave. But that's all right. That is leading to this, and there is still a contrast with everything else that's gone on. So I think it's a really nice, fresh color, right? That's the main concern. And then bassoons, ba-ba-ba-ba-bom. And I really love the little, harmonic support needed is my question mark. Like, I'm not saying that it has to be, but I'm just asking whether or not the orchestrator wanted it. And in this case, you do. Pizzicato, and I think that works perfectly. Like, if you have, especially with singly articulated pitches here. But why? Why leave out the word leggermente, right? I mean, it's in the score. It was in the template. It's like, why is it? Does it have cooties or something? Why is everybody leaving out the word leggermente? It's a beautiful word. It's a wonderful word. He's saying, play this with like a certain, agility and virtuosity and lightness and delicacy, right? Right? As opposed to ta 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 ta. Instead of that, you put the word leggermente under here, and that your piccolo player and flute player will go, ha 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 ha. Right? That's sort of like, what's Beethoven doing in this sonata? Picturesque, like it's, if we put a program on it, Beethoven is composing himself. He's ready to take a walk around, to get out into the country. It's been a long time. So he's about to go out the door. He's putting on his hat and his coat, and he's just feeling really good about today. And he gets out into the countryside, and he's walking around, and it's just his beautiful morning, like just getting out of stinky old Vienna and his stupid apartment and all of his worries, and and he's just looking at the countryside. He's feeling fantastic, right? And then something makes him laugh. Now, what is it? Like some guy's like walking down the street, and the sole of his boot is starting to fall off, and Beethoven's like thinking, oh geez, I could help this guy. So Beethoven picks a florin out of his coat pocket and says, my man, I'm worried about your shoe there. Here, I'll give you a florin and you could fix that sole. And the guy says, there's nothing wrong with my shoe, and he flops onwards, right? And Beethoven has a chuckle. Or it could be something like that, or just he sees like just something silly or sweet or funny, and he has a good laugh about it, right? So I think that keeping that in mind, I think that this works really nicely. Like if these are like separately articulated pitches, is a really long roundabout way of saying it. And then like the pizzicato adds to the kind of quality of humor there. I think you forgot to write arco down here for your lower strings, like the return, right? You want nice long, fierce, sustained half notes here in your lower strings. Okay, so the bassoons answer, and then you have your reed instruments. Take the and that ticks another one of my boxes here in my evaluation criteria of, is there a contrast between the lines? Yes, there's, first you have flute family, then you have oboe family plus clarinets, so all reeds, answered by bassoon again. All right, now, is there an emphatic color of line? Oh, yes, indeedy, right? So considering how, this is kind of, do you want this also to be ta 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 ta? What if it were slurred, like ta 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 ta? I like the accents. I think they're really great, and I think you don't need to do this kind of slur in trombone, which is not the most effective thing in the world. Okay, and I think you should really absolutely mark, some kind of dynamics here. What if this were a little softer, right? And then you come back loud with a crescendo towards forte, right? Okay, these are the only instruments that have any dynamic markings at all in this section, right? What's going on here? Ta 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 bum. This is great. This is enough. Just one single trombone going bum bum. You don't need a staccato here, and don't take away the slur. All right, and then I would say everybody mezzo forte in the brass, but forte in the timpani, right? And everybody should get to forte by the time they get to here. Well, however you're going to do it. Maybe you could go crescendo to forte, like just like have this ba da. So we're starting from mezzo forte da da. Right, so a little bit of crescendo action. Everybody's playing forte, and bum bum bum. Yeah, and then it's really cool the way that you answer pizzicato strings and brass section with a little bit of clarinet and trombone. Bum bum. Nobody's really going to hear, nobody's going to hear the clarinets in here. However, yeah, just you sort of, the way that the trombone is scored, I think that you could have filled in, like especially looking at the actual music that Beethoven scored, right? You're kind of taking out the bottom end a little bit here in your brass. Fill it out a little bit, right? This would be better off as tuba in terms of like getting the balance, or doubled by tuba. And then bum 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 wires the tuba mezzo piano. Right, and then dun dun answered by winds and pizzicato. Yeah, I mean it's just a lovely idea. Okay, all right. So Martin. I'm just sitting here jawing about your fun scoring here, and despite the fact that it might sound like I've ripped it to pieces, I actually really liked it a lot, and I thought that you had, once again, a very individual take on this. And in fact, I would just say that about all of these scores. They really have the heavy stamp of the personality of each orchestrator. I did not feel in any way with any of them that anybody was slavishly imitating some other orchestrator or some other approach or some other style. I really felt that all of you had really, made a statement artistically about your own, your own particular of your approach. So, good work, well done to you all, and Martin, especially here at the end, with such a bright, happy, positive piece. How could I feel in any way like this was a burden to me, and that it was, that how could I feel too badly about the delay when there was such a wonderful ending here at the end of this last compilation. So thank you to all my website subscribers. Thank you to all my viewers. And thanks also to my Patreon supporters. This is, you guys are gonna like this. My just to share this information with my website subscribers, is the Patreon supporters insisted on your videos being shared in the Patreon feed. Right? It's like, put it here, right? Because a lot of people over there, like that's really where most of their interaction with the community is just right there on the Patreon feed. Is like they'll just, like, whatever I post, they want to see it there, and they were interested in seeing what you guys were going to do. So that's why they are there. I was like, they admire what you guys do, and they're interested in it, and they want to compare it to their efforts and everything else. All right, and that's really great. This community is so awesome. Just the way everybody hangs together and has such a great attitude about each other, and a real concern for the art and how we're all making progress. Right. I don't see people backbiting. I don't see people sniping at each other out of like the spirit of anxiety over their own efforts and so on and so forth. People are supporting each other. They're sharing opportunities. They're backing each other up, and I just think it's wonderful. And there is a special dedication that I see from people who join the website subscription. and like very seldom, like like with most website subscriber kinds of things, like you'll get a bunch of signups, and then every time you send out a newsletter, you'll get like a ton of dead email kind of things, or mailbox full or whatever, and I rarely get that. Maybe if I haven't sent out a newsletter in like a long time. But in this latest case, like when I started up my newsletter again a couple of months ago, sent it out. There was one account where where somebody had, like, I don't know, their mailbox was full, or they had changed emails addresses or something like that, and not updated their account. So yeah, so like everybody's really interested out there, and I just have to say thank you so much, because that's another way of showing support to the channel. Like maybe not everybody can afford to contribute on Patreon, or is all that active at Facebook, but people are following along, they are watching the videos, they are commenting under each other's efforts, and that really makes a big difference to me. It just and just like it's everything that I really ever wanted, right? From these challenges. So thank you, everybody, and I really appreciate it. So with that, we have looked at every single one of these website subscriber scores. We have looked at every single Patreon evaluation score up to the dotted brev scores, which are going to start in the month of November, released on Saturdays and Sundays, and also on Black Friday during the Thanksgiving holiday for the USA. All right. So hold on tight. There are going to be a couple little extra things added to those very long videos of the full movement evaluations. I'm going to add a little intermission feature, which I hope people will enjoy. All right. So hang on tight, and I will see you next weekend.